We said we'd go, and go on time, but we never said we'd go quietly. Nor after such a long stewardship did we ever intend going without due ceremony. Never was a farewell so fondly or so meticulously prepared. It may well be said that nothing became the British in Hong Kong like their leaving of it. The last order was bellowed out across the parade ground. The Prince of Wales took his final salute, and as the last umpire faded away, suddenly it was time for the changing of the guard.
Good evening from Hong Kong at the end of an extraordinary 48 hours. After a century and a half of British rule, this remarkable city is back in Chinese hands. For Britain, the handover has been a postscript to the end of empire. For China, it marks the end of 150 years of national humiliation. But for the people who live here, it's a leap into the unknown. Tonight, we say farewell to Hong Kong, look back on its past and forward to its future. We'll hear from Hong Kong's people, look at the sights and sounds of the events surrounding the handover, and hear from China what it means to people there. But let's begin here with the excitement of the past 2 days. ITN senior foreign correspondent Michael Nicholson has been out on the streets watching the pomp and ceremony and assessing the new realities of life here.
How did you enjoy it?
Oh, very much,
Huh?
yes.
Tears in the eyes?
Definitely, when the flags went down, yes.
It was great. Of course, a bit sad. You know, we've been here 24 years and it's the end of an era.
We're staying on and we're looking forward to the future. And we're going to have a really good time tonight.
Was ever the end of British colonial rule celebrated with such gusto by the British? You'd think we were taking over this place rather than handing it back. Over 3,000 crowded into the Regent Hotel for their end of empire thrash. Mostly, it seemed, Hong Kong yuppies praying that things won't change. It's extraordinary, isn't it? There should be such a celebration for this mating of communism and capitalism. But let's face it, these people work here in Hong Kong. They want to continue working here. And their nostalgia is hard-nosed. What's past is past. This crown colony is dead. From now on, money is truly the king. At the stroke of midnight, suddenly they were living in communist China. So it was off with the old and on with the garb of their new economic masters in Beijing.
Okay, now and then.
Red is in fashion, but you have to wonder whether communism will fit them quite so comfortably. And meanwhile, inside the great exhibition centre, insulated from the hubbub outside, the real business was about to be done. The formal handover, the lease given back to the landlords, China's President Jiang Zemin and Premier Li Peng. And watching, Baroness Thatcher, who signed the handback agreement 13 years ago. This was the moment when history began its audit of British rule here, with so many hoping that all that was good in that legacy will not be removed by the stroke of a pen or a broken promise. Then the last of so many goodbyes. Governor Patten, now plain Mr., prepared to board the royal yacht Britannia, his host Prince Charles, and leave the place that had, in his own words, captured his heart and that of his family. At a little after midnight, the royal yacht slipped her moorings, and to the hymn Jerusalem, played by the Royal Marines, this last elegant remnant of colonial rule steamed away into the South China Sea. Dawn this morning, the first in this new beginning, and a brand new experience for those who got up early to brave the monsoon rain and watch the Chinese People's Liberation Army roll into Hong Kong. To some, it constitutes a rather unsubtle show of force. Why, after all, should they need armored personnel carriers? But we are told that these one-time demons of Tiananmen Square are now reformed and regroomed. We're promised that they'll be benign and benevolent, sensitive to Hong Kong's peculiar fondness for self-expression. And well they might do, because this army uniquely has its own financial and commercial empire, and it has already invested hundreds of millions of pounds here in Hong Kong. So it's very much in their interests to make certain that this place remains calm and happy. Calm and happy, that's easier said than done. China has promised a degree of political freedom here, but the pro-democracy activists want more. They're demanding from Beijing free elections, not only for themselves, but all China. And today they held their biggest ever rally. Day one, and they are already chancing their luck. There'll be many more marches like this because they're testing the water. They're trying Beijing's patience to see just how much dissent like this they will allow. You think marches like this will actually make them sit up and listen?
Yes. If we keep going on and on after the handover, they will listen to us.
It is still very important that the people in Hong Kong can stand up and make sure that enough pressure is put on the Beijing government not to compromise our civil liberties, our human rights.
At today's Hong Kong Chinese reunification spectacular, the theme was a better tomorrow, and who doesn't wish them luck? But now the British have gone, no one's quite sure what it is they've left behind, except perhaps uncertainty. There's no pretending it's not a gamble, and that is Hong Kong's future. For richer, for poorer, for better, for worse.
When I first stood on this waterfront almost 20 years ago, I was struck then, as most visitors are, by the enormous energy of this trading city. In the years since my visit, sleek skyscrapers have continued their upward push, resplendent advertisements for this city's breathtaking boom. But that's not the full story. Parts of Hong Kong have missed out on the economic miracle. Over the past few days, I've traveled around the former colony, talking to people who have made it the unique place it is. Kipling called Hong Kong somewhere between heaven and earth. Today, its awesome architecture, which seems to defy gravity, has come to symbolize spectacular commercial success. Permeating this city's soul is a mania to buy and sell and to make money. Hong Kong life surges on a restless wave of energy to excel in business. Hardly anyone walks casually here. It's as if people are racing against time. I joined the crowd to board the Star Ferry, as I'd done many times before, to cross one of the busiest harbors in the world, to go to Kowloon and to the shops. Crucial to transport here, these ferries are British built. Shopping in Kowloon is very Hong Kong. First call, Sam the tailor. Sam, how nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, sir.
It's a long time. Sam's commercial boast is that no one in the trade can make a suit faster than he can. He can do it in 1 hour and 50 minutes. As he measured me up, he promised to make mine in a day. That's how Hong Kong works, with speed and incredible drive. Sam, do you expect business to change at all?
No, I don't think so, because Chinese would never like to lose this touch, and they will show to the British they are more brilliant, they have taken over from them. We'll show them all the activity will be more successful.
So you'll continue making a lot of money, will you?
Yeah, still we have to, because it's our own thing. We'll show to the people that we are still successful.
No, you're not planning to go anywhere, to
No,
leave Hong Kong. You'll always be here.
That's right. It's quite a good place for making money still.
Pressure on space in Hong Kong means that Sam's workshop is cramped, but it's turned out clothes for presidents and prime ministers, governors and generals. My first fitting was only hours away from the finished product. Not bad for a suit made in a day. Conspicuous wealth has become Hong Kong's badge of honor. It's not out of the ordinary here to show to the world just how well you have done. Kai Bong Chow, Cambridge-educated barrister, deals in imports and exports. He and his wife Brenda have a Rolls-Royce each and live a gilded existence. And Bong, keeping to the theme of gold, this is the gold bathroom.
Yes, this is a his and hers basin. It's been made according to our specification.
The Chows, whose house is in one of the smarter areas of Hong Kong, call this their dessert room. We sat down to talk in the main dining room. Were the British good for Hong Kong?
Yes, they were very good to help to make Hong Kong prosperous.
And will the Chinese be equally good for Hong Kong?
Oh, I'm sure they would. And who want to kill the duck that lays golden eggs?
Brenda, will the presence of the Chinese here make any difference to this lavish lifestyle which you enjoy and which many people do enjoy in Hong Kong?
Oh, I think the lifestyle would be more or less the same because, all the Chinese people and all the people in Hong Kong were promised by China that, Hong Kong will be ruled by one country, two systems. And then the system ruling Hong Kong in the future will remain the same as before.
People left behind in freewheeling, affluent Hong Kong will not be too concerned about the fate of lavish lifestyles. Questions in this part of the city are more basic. Hong Kong's market-driven economics is only now beginning to acknowledge the need for a welfare system. Too late for some. In this room, in a depressing, run-down apartment block, old people live in cages, stacked one upon the other. I was told that on occasions in a room of this size there could be up to 30. It's unimaginable. This place is legal. That means it has a fire escape and running water. Does she think the handover to China will make any difference to her life?
你再講多次啊！究竟你覺得回歸之後會唔會你嘅生活有改變？
唔知㗎，我唔知有冇改轉㗎。
This 85-year-old told me she didn't have a view, but she'll be contented as long as she has enough to eat. Thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Almost as strong as the urge to make money here is a passion for food, for cooking and for eating. Families make it the theme around which their day revolves. The massive food industry has firm links with China. Practically all the food eaten in this city comes from China. Where Hong Kong excels in the relationship is in the quality of its restaurants. They're the envy of mainland visitors. And that suggests, according to television chef Yvonne Wu, that China won't harm Hong Kong. So people are pretty optimistic about what's going to happen?
Yes, very optimistic.
No need for alarms?
No need for alarms. I mean, Hong Kong financially, every aspect is still very, very stable. And I'm sure all the foreign countries will keep an eye on us.
And the thesis is that the Chinese wouldn't want to do anything to spoil all this?
Exactly. I mean, we spent so many years establishing Hong Kong from a very poor fishing port to almost the greatest financial center in the world. So why ruin it?
All these brash symbols of Western-style capitalism now come under China. How China absorbs them will determine how it's judged throughout 1997 and beyond. I'm joined now in our studio in Hong Kong by two people who have watched the ceremonies over the past couple of days. David Tang, a hugely successful entrepreneur, and the actor Jeremy Irons, who is starring in a movie being shot here against the background of the handover. Jeremy Irons, you talked to people over the last week here. What were their anxieties, their emotions? What did they tell you? What did they feel?
I don't think they knew what they felt. It was very curious. Even last night, as one began to watch the pageant unfold, people were discovering how they felt. I don't know whether that people felt it they were happy or sad. There was certainly sadness last night as the flag came down.
Did you get through to them? Because people always begin by saying, we're fairly optimistic. Did you get beyond that?
I think people are at base quite worried. People who don't have passports to get out, should it not turn out to be to their taste.
David Tang, you have a British passport. You worried?
No, because I've got a British passport. I think it's politically incorrect, even if you feel slightly awkward about Chinese sovereignty, that you should say so. I mean, it's simply unpatriotic to say that I'm worried. So
you just said it.
If for phase, I'm stating the proposition that it is so, and that's why you don't get very many people saying it. And I think your question implied that is that it's like a maturing bourgeois society. You don't actually declare your hands. You always like to make sure that Mr. Wong next door and Ms. Chan next door is saying the same thing. And, but then there's nothing wrong with that, because that builds up optimism in a way, because unless you're optimistic, at least at these times, you're not going to make it work. So I'm all for it, if only for the wrong reason.
But you have a foot in both camps, because as you say, you were British educated, you have huge business interests here. Conflicting emotions about the departure of the British last night?
Well, first of all, I'm not the only one. I mean, I went off to study in England, but then so lots of my friends who are in the same generation, and there's been 2 generations since then who have gone. So lots of people have had the benefit of a Western education, and they've come back. Indeed, it all started at the beginning of the century when Chinese went abroad to study, and they've learned quite a lot. Mixed emotions, yes, because I think, in my case at any rate, I think you Brits have not done a bad job in Hong Kong at all. If anything, if there is anything good to be said about British colonialism, Hong Kong is a shining example.
Jeremy, was that your view of the way this place operated? What for you was the real Hong Kong when you, because you lived here for a period of time when you were doing the film?
I did. I think real Hong Kong, all due deference to David, it's a money-making rock, full of a lot of people making a huge amount of money. And a lot of other people living in very basic conditions. So I think there is a coming together needed. I think the British have done well here. They've made a huge amount of money in the last 15 years. And if Hong Kong continues like that, then those British remaining and the Chinese will do very well here.
You have a motto, David Tang,
I'm just say
which is,
I mean, the dichotomy between the rich and the poor, that's found everywhere, Jeremy.
More here than certainly in London.
No, it's not true, you see.
Certainly
I mean, name me one place in the world where over half the population actually lived in subsidized housing. Now, that's welfareism.
Let's not quite get into that.
I
wanted to touch the point that that Jeremy made about money. You've always said, talk money, not politics. But in the new Hong Kong, politics is going to be willy-nilly an inescapable part of life, isn't it?
No, I don't. My point there was that for businessmen, you cannot expect them to talk about politics, like human rights and so forth. Just as professor of music shouldn't be talking about human rights either. All I'm saying is that that's the way Hong Kong is, and people will keep to that.
Jeremy, were you
I think, by the way, that everybody should talk about human rights. I don't see why businessmen shouldn't. Businessmen...
So do I.
Businessmen run
I agree.
the world.
But this is not a perfect world. That's why there's a problem.
We should try to make it more perfect, David.
You and I might.
Businessmen cannot turn their back on human conditions, on human rights. It is their responsibility.
Civilization is about persuasion. I will go on persuading my friends and people I know to talk about human rights. But the fact of the matter is that people are not persuaded a lot of the time.
Were you terribly sad to see Britannia move away last night into the darkness, Jeremy?
I was, especially since I believe it's its last trip. It's her last trip. I was very sad. But, you know, parting is such sweet sorrow.
Jeremy Hines, David Tang, thank you very much indeed. This pagoda in the center of the business district has been built to commemorate Hong Kong's return to China. 1,200 miles from here, successive governments in Beijing have viewed British possession of Hong Kong as a constant reminder of imperialist treachery. That's why the handover has been marked throughout China by official celebrations and proclamations of great joy. And as our diplomatic editor Robert Moore discovered, on the very first day of reunification, the big question is, will China change Hong Kong? Or will Hong Kong be the key to change in China?
The leadership sees the return of Hong Kong as an historic moment, a giant step towards reunification. But travel far out of Beijing into China's provinces, and the celebrations and political rituals of Tiananmen Square suddenly seem remote. This week it has been the harvest, not Hong Kong, that appears to be the overwhelming concern of China's people. In the villages lying in the shadow of the Great Wall in Hebei province, peasant farmers like Zhang Shouchan explain they know almost nothing about Hong Kong, not even if it is a poor or a rich city. For her family, life is a struggle far removed from the patriotism playing in Beijing. Of course, we'd like to go to Hong Kong, she says, but our real concern is educating our children. China's schools are engaged in a full-scale propaganda exercise. The children rigorously taught the Communist Party line, that 150 years of national humiliation is over. That China is now poised to reassert itself. Amid the salutes and nationalism, no mention is made of Hong Kong's free press or its liberties. The celebrations I have witnessed seem to reflect a genuine Chinese patriotism, a pride in the motherland. But there is an inescapable irony. The very nature of these celebrations, driven by the Communist Party, tightly disciplined, devoid of debate and dissent, illustrate not so much national unity, but the vast differences in political culture between Hong Kong and the Chinese mainland. Watching and listening to these children in the classroom as they end their lesson by singing a patriotic song, I was left to wonder whether they will ever grow up to ask the hidden but truly explosive question. If Hong Kong, now part of China, can have political freedoms, why can't we? Almost no one here dares to raise their voice. Political dissent, especially in Beijing, is still ruthlessly crushed. But there is a remarkable exception. In a country of over 1 billion people, Dai Qing is among the very few in the heart of China still speaking out. She says that the Communist Party is using Hong Kong's return to strengthen its grip on power.
是的，就是本来呢，共产党一直就是讲。
All along, the Communist Party has maintained power by relying on two things, the gun and propaganda. To strengthen their power, they use that propaganda and control public opinion. Hong Kong's return is a still better opportunity for them, because they can use not only propaganda, but nationalism.
另外呢，我也期望，我也是。
I persist in speaking out like this, in meeting people like you and expressing my views. Why? If no one ever says what they feel, then China has no hope of improving.
But where there is no political reform, there is economic change on an exhilarating scale. In Shanghai, rapid construction is transforming the city. The race is now on with Hong Kong to become China's most dynamic business centre. Even as Shanghai's frenetic development continues, the city mayor talks not of a rivalry, but of an economic partnership with Hong Kong. The two cities, he says, will be like the two actors in the same play, or like the two eyes in a gigantic dragon. Even at night, the floodlights go up and the work goes on. The talk here is not of China changing Hong Kong, but of Hong Kong changing China. I found that already Shanghai is unrecognizable as a communist city. The only ideology on display is the belief in wealth and change.
Back in our studio in Hong Kong, I'm joined by Emily Lau, who has campaigned for democracy and human rights here, and was until the handover a member of the Legislative Council, and by David Chu, a pro-China businessman. He sat in the old Legislative Council and now has a seat in the new legislature. David Chu, my understanding is that the new legislature will advance reforms very soon. How close will they be to a thoroughgoing democracy?
Well, I mean, we will do extensive consultation, including we will consult Emily Lau, because if we don't do it, she will let us know anyway.
Emily Lau, why wouldn't you accept that?
Well, I think it's quite disgraceful to allow the whole of Hong Kong to be disenfranchised on July 1st.
But he says that they are going to
No,
move
now
to
that's the
legislative
second step.
reforms.
I'm going to the first step. We've been disenfranchised. Then they're going to make laws and saying we'll have an election next year. But my question is, why next year? Why can't we have them now? And then about next year, I think many people are very, very skeptical. They don't believe the communists, the Chinese, would allow democratic elections to be held. There's a contradiction there with communism and democracy.
Isn't there that fundamental contradiction, David Chu? And that is what worries people.
That's why we have one country, two systems. Hong Kong will remain to be capitalistic system. If it's one country, one system,
but
then...
on those questions of reforms, can I come back to that?
Sure.
How close will they be to what we understand in the West as democracy?
Well, the two election methods we're studying now, they are being used by many other countries. So we will not come up with the election method, which is very weird, which keeps out Emily Lau. I can assure you, in May 1998, Emily Lau will be re-elected. If she's not re-elected, I'll give you $100,000 Hong Kong, Emily.
Well, we wait to see that.
Promise.
Emily Lau, President Jiang Zemin went out of his way to say he will not harm Hong Kong. China will act in Hong Kong's interest. Why did you believe that?
Well, the Chinese words cannot be trusted. If you look at the Sino-British...
Here's a president making a public declaration.
No.
And you choose to disbelieve him.
Well, because they have broken the promises they made to us before. You talk about the provisional legislature. You cannot find it in the Sino-British Joint Declaration or in the Basic Law. There's no provision for this monster. And the Chinese made it up when they felt it was expedient. So they will break their promise, they will make something up as they go along, so long as it suits them. This is the unhappy memory of many Chinese people. That's why the people just don't trust the government.
On the question of not trusting them, David Chu, let me say this. I heard people saying about the one country, two system that Emily Lau referred to, and they're saying, in fact, what will eventuate is that one system will submerge the other. Have you heard that?
Well, in time, I'm sure. I mean, we're experiencing the globalization of culture, business, politics. So eventually, naturally, we're going to grow closer. But I think China is likely to be closer to Hong Kong rather than the other way around. And in business terminology, it's going to be a reverse takeover.
I don't think it's like that at all. China wants a prosperous Hong Kong. We don't doubt that. But it has to be on China's terms.
And what are those terms in your view?
You come and make money, fine. We make money, everybody's happy. Maybe it's very corrupt. But no criticisms of the Chinese leadership, or else there could be dire consequences.
You had an article pulled by one of the papers recently.
Yes, by the Hong Kong Economic Times. I wrote about secession, subversion, offenses which are in the Basic Law. I say they have no place in the Hong Kong statute book. The newspaper thought that was too hot to handle.
So there was censorship even before July the 1st.
We call it self-censorship, not by government yet.
But Emily, newspaper, drop articles every day.
No, David, in this case, they promised me they would run it. And then at the last minute, they pulled it. Yeah, of course they changed their mind. The question is why?
I received the same treatment many times on pro-China articles.
Emily Lau mentioned the question of corruption. This is another fear I've heard frequently expressed here. And it's put to me in this way, that what's going to happen is that there's going to be a political link with business. And if you don't have that China political link, then your business could suffer.
Emily loves your words. I can see her expression.
No. But I mean, it's something I've heard not only from Emily, but I've heard from other people too.
But the fact is, China is China, Hong Kong is Hong Kong. If we project all the problems of China on Hong Kong, we might as well pack up and go home. So we're two different entities. In Hong Kong, we have, in the last 20 years, developed the anti-corruption culture. It's within 6 million of us. And we have effective agencies to deal with corruption in Hong Kong.
David Chu, Emily Lau, thank you very much indeed. After the break, Chris Patten, Hong Kong's last governor. Were his democratic reforms too little, too late? And we'll consider the future for Hong Kong's children. What sort of country will they grow up in? It's been said that the Hong Kong success story was built on the Chinese spirit of enterprise and the British skill for administration. The center of that administration was here, Government House for more than 140 years. But from today, nothing more than a symbol of an age that has lost its place in time. As Hong Kong begins its new life fraught with speculation and uncertainty, the economy is booming, and on the surface, confidence appears to be high. But will it last? Will the growth of the past few years continue? And will concern about civil liberties in the new Hong Kong sap the vital energy that has made business here the envy of the world. ITN's former Asia correspondent Caroline Kerr has been talking to people about the future.
For months, children from all over Hong Kong have been rehearsing for today's festivities. They sing in celebration of Hong Kong's reunification with the motherland. But will the new Hong Kong, which they have inherited, be worth celebrating? Across the city, with more enthusiasm than expertise, a brother and sister practice an old colonial tune. Their mother believes Hong Kong is not about to change dramatically. The family will stay on because, she explains, what's important is being able to make money.
Because I just think about my kids. I want them to live happily, to get the best education, to have good living.
These children are growing up in a city built on trade. As long as there's money to be made, their parents admit they won't worry too much about issues like freedom and democracy. Most of the older people here have experienced extreme poverty at first hand, and the memory runs deep. The fact is, money matters in Hong Kong, wherever you stand on the social scale. And one of the main ways in which the incoming regime will be judged will be its ability to allow the people of Hong Kong to continue to prosper.
If you don't have confidence in Hong Kong, you should just sell out and just kiss Hong Kong goodbye.
The wealthy in Hong Kong are voting with their feet. They're staying put. Ronnie Chan is a billionaire property developer who says big business has nothing to fear from China.
We are not the smartest people in the world, but we're not the dumbest either. And the fact that we put our money in this very place now, I think, is an indication of our strong confidence. My company, for example, small company, we probably have put, I don't know, maybe $3 billion in Hong Kong real estate alone in the last 4 or 5 years.
But not every money-making venture here is so legitimate.
Don't worry about us, right?
British-born Chief Superintendent Anthony McLaughlin leads a raid on a gambling parlour in Hong Kong's red light district.
Don't come out again unless you've got ID. Do you understand?
He's been fighting crime here for 27 years, and he's not going to give up now just because of the handover.
It's a bit sad, you know, but, oh, no problems. Change cap badge and away we go, you know.
It's satay and satay, Peking duck.
The McLaughlin family's traditional Sunday lunch is in a Chinese restaurant. For all of them, Hong Kong is home, and they want it to stay that way.
What I think and what I hope is that it won't change very much. I can't see anything dramatic happening, certainly for the first few years, but who knows? It's like looking at a crystal ball.
Elizabeth Wong thinks people here are deluding themselves. She was a member of Hong Kong's old parliament, the Legislative Council, which has now been disbanded.
The danger is the unwitting loss of our freedom, unwitting loss of our way of life, our values. People don't realize that Hong Kong is changing and they're not alert. You know, human rights issues and all that must be constantly monitored.
At the Wong Tai Sing Temple, they're praying for success under the new regime. Although the Hong Kong Chinese are famous for making their own luck, in truth, they put great faith in the power of the gods to help them in their quest for wealth and happiness. By the same token, they accept that if the fates are against them, they must accept with patience whatever misfortune befalls them. The fact is, no one can be sure how Hong Kong will fare under Chinese rule, and underlying the overt optimism is a tacit anxiety. As a newborn child is brought to pay homage to the gods, it's the traditions of the past which provide most faith for the future.
The 28th and last British governor, Chris Patten, tried his best during his 5 years here to inspire a new spirit of openness and accountability. But Mr. Patten is history now and must await history's verdict on how well he did here. His own views are clear, as I discovered when I talked to him before the handover. We talked about his controversial democratic reforms, about past British mistakes, and about his hopes for the future of the former British colony he now entrusts to China. Chris Patten, looking back at it now, could the issue of Hong Kong have been resolved any differently?
I don't think so, because of the agreement in 1898. It was inevitable that come this year, Hong Kong would return to Chinese sovereignty. We negotiated a deal in 1984, which tried to underpin Hong Kong's freedom and Hong Kong's system for 50 years after 1997. I think it was a pretty good agreement. You've got to remember that for the Chinese, for particularly the leadership in China, Hong Kong represents a sort of 19th century humiliation, a humiliation of the Qing dynasty. And I think that they've always seen Hong Kong through that glass, through that prism. So I think they were always going to want, as a matter of national pride, to take Hong Kong back.
Was it on reflection a grave mistake never to have consulted the people of Hong Kong about what they wanted?
I think in the past there was a slight tendency to do things over the heads of the people of Hong Kong, or they often felt behind their backs. Now, I don't think anybody can legitimately point that criticism at us in the last few years.
Before you got on the scene, you see, all your reforms might have been made much easier had that ground been set before. Was it a mistake never to have done anything like that at all?
I think that it was probably a mistake not to recognize that from about the mid-1970s, there was a developing civic consciousness, a developing political consciousness in Hong Kong. But from about the mid-70s, when there started to develop a politically conscious, well-trained, well-educated middle class, I think from about that time we should perhaps have been a little more sensitive to the views of people in Hong Kong. After all, we always knew that Hong Kong, our responsibilities in Hong Kong, were going to end in a way totally different from how our responsibilities had ended in every other colony. Everywhere else, a colony became an independent country.
Indeed, independence was probably never an option. As you say, the Chinese would never have allowed it. But a district board, a municipal council, something like that.
When I made my first visit to Hong Kong in 1979 as a young backbench member of Parliament, that's one of the things I advocated and argued for. And it started in the early 80s, but some people would say that we should have pressed it a little more enthusiastically.
Some Hong Kong Chinese have suggested that coming up to your time now, the reforms that you have initiated are a last-minute exercise in British face-saving.
No, I think what they are is a determined attempt to ensure that we could say hand on heart when we left Hong Kong that we'd not only left it in very good condition, which we clearly have, but that we'd kept our promises in the Joint Declaration to the people of Hong Kong. That we have done. And what the international community are now going to be looking at is whether China keeps its word as well.
The bottom line, though, is this. Britain is handing over the 6 or so million people in Hong Kong to one of the most repressive governments known to the modern world. That's the bottom line.
The bottom line is indeed that Hong Kong is not becoming independent this year, that Hong Kong is a very free city, is returning to the sovereignty of a country which has, shall we say, a different notion of freedom. That, for me,
euphemistic way of putting
it was a spectacular euphemism. That, for me, underlines the importance of us doing everything we can to stand up for Hong Kong's freedoms and to safeguard Hong Kong's freedoms.
You seem to acknowledge that to some extent you had to do it. It was the honourable, decent, British thing to do, but an exercise perhaps in futility.
What we've done is to establish some benchmarks. People in Hong Kong now know what a free election is like. People in Hong Kong know what it means to stand up for the freedoms that they've been promised. And you've seen in recent months, when there have been attempts to roll back people's freedoms in Hong Kong, you've seen the community standing up and arguing passionately to protect those freedoms. I very much hope that Hong Kong will go on pretty much the same. There may be some changes. I hope that they will be superficial. Hong Kong has been promised that its own system would survive. The phrase which Deng Xiaoping used wasn't one country, one and a bit systems, it was one country, two systems. And it's very important that that system of freedom and the rule of law, open market, open to ideas as well as goods, it's very important that all that survives.
Britannia is sailing out of the waters of Hong Kong, heading back home. What sort of thoughts do you have?
I'm obviously going to be personally sad at leaving Hong Kong. It's been 5 years of my life and 5 years of my family's life. It's been a tremendous and exciting responsibility, presiding over what people have seen as a sort of postscript to the end of the British Empire. It's a great city. I'll miss it. I wish it well, and I hope it retains its boisterousness, its freewheeling nature, its argumentativeness, and its dynamism. I'm sure it will. I wish it the very best for the future.
The departing thoughts of the last governor, Chris Patten. For all of us here, the past few days have left memories that will stay with us for many years to come. It's been a time of mixed emotions, celebrations, but with some sadness too. From me and from all my colleagues here in Hong Kong, good night